When power corrupts, it keeps a log of its progress. Written into the most sensitive memory device, the human face. Yesterday, I finished Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. This came recommended to me by my friend Ness, who has been just going on about how great this author is and how amazing they are, and that I really need to expand my horizons from just reading fantasy all the time into more literary fiction. So I decided to give this a go because it was free on Audible. And I will just say immediately, I have some very mixed feelings about this particular novel. So I'm going to start with the positives and go into negatives and try to figure out how to recommend this book, because it's a weird one and I'm not really sure who this will work for. First of all, the prose is pretty good. This book is very hippy-dippy, and I mean that literally. It's written in a way that you feel like you're talking to a hippie that is stoned out of their minds. It's very funny. There are a lot of like pop cultural references or like nods. A lot of jokes in here. Not that I found particularly funny, but like it's like supposed to be funny. And it's supposed to be a very humorous book that does not take itself too seriously. And the prose lends itself very, very well to that. I also found the narrator for the audiobook to be really good. Pretty much the perfect narrator for a book like this. He has like the perfect cadence. The way he says stuff is very like, it just fits. Like it just fits so well. I also think a lot of the ideas in here are really solid. This author is obviously taking some time to critique both the era of hippies that was the 60s and also kind of what happened after. The stuff that happened in the 70s and the 80s with Nixon and Reagan. How we went from this kind of very, it seemed like at the time, progressive step forward in America with, stuff like the New Deal and equal rights becoming a thing. And we had like JFK and he was going to, get rid of all these, 3-letter agencies and all this stuff. And we're going to have a small government that was for the people and, all that stuff. And then it just kind of collapsed in on itself with Nixon and the drug war, and then even more so with Reagan and all the stuff that happened with him. I'm not going to get into it here, but we went from what felt like a more progressive time into a more authoritarian time, whether that's true or not. But that's what it felt like at the time. And he really examines that. He really examines why did these kind of very revolutionary ideas, these very progressive people, seem to just suddenly disappear. Like, why did hippies and Woodstock just fall flat on its face? Like, why did this progressive movement, why did these revolutionaries just suddenly disappear off the map? And he kind of talks about it. Talks about how some of them were jailed and killed, but also a lot of them were, essentially rich white people cosplaying, and they realized that that's not really the life for them, that all of this was make-believe, that all of their activism and their concern for their fellow citizens and their want of socialism, or at least some sort of social safety nets, was really all made up, and that essentially they gave it up all to go back to a more conservative, traditional, authoritarian, but comfortable way of life. And I found that really interesting. I found that really, really fascinating, because I think we're living in a similar time when it comes to young people. There is a lot of online activism and people who pretend to care about things, but when it comes down to it, they're not really willing to put their life on the line or do anything about it to actually make these changes occur. And I think this book was written in 1990, but it's amazing how he connects something that happened, all these years ago to what was happening at his time in 1990, and how you can kind of see that, part of history come around again. I thought that was a really brilliant part of this novel. I found the politics and those insights to be really, really cool. There's also just like a ton of like pop culture references. It feels like you're living through the 60s in this book. It's got like feminist ninjas in it. It's got like drug dealing, like former Yakuza members. It's got all sorts of like really just like wacky off the wall like bits, and like it's kind of like all over the place. So I like all of that, right? My problem, however, is that like at least in my opinion, from what I've read, and this is all subjective, is that it felt like the author had like a half-baked idea for a much better novel. And the way that he delivered this book is really he shot himself in the foot. Because like the plot is very aimless. The plot is essentially about a girl trying to find her mother, and the way that she does that is by discovering what her mother was through a series of really wild shenanigan flashbacks. Her mom was one of these, hippie filmmakers who thought that, if you just create the exact correct movie, then, the capitalist pigs will collapse. The bourgeoisie will all fall, and the proletariat will rise again. But she sold her soul in favor of like a DEA agent who is really good and bad, and that is literally the plot of the novel. And that sounds like it could be a really, really good book, right? But the way that it's delivered is so aimless. I mean, like, even if you physically read this book and you take your time, every time you get to a new chapter, you're gonna be like, but how does this connect to the last chapter? And where did that character, who I thought was going to be important, go? And why is this thing happening? How does that have any relevance to what just happened? And for me, that's like a big no-no when it comes to like writing a book, right? In my opinion, a plot should be cohesive. And you can write however you want, but for me as a reader, I want your plot to make sense. And while there are threads throughout this novel that connect with one another and they make sense, there are also several points where I was like, what? Why am I wasting my time with this like weird shenanigan that ultimately does not add anything to the story besides being like funny and like weird and off-putting? And I guess like that for me is like such a like, it really grates me. The way that this is written really grates me. Not the writing itself, but the way that the story is delivered is really nonsensical. I mean, really, really nonsensical. And it kind of diminishes the parts of the novel that are great. It diminishes this message of, why these revolutionaries failed. It diminishes this aspect of how horrible the government was at times towards revolutionaries, and how it set up a lot of these people to fail, and how there was a lot of lying and cheating by the government during this era, and all these things. It diminishes all of that. It diminishes the overall message and the overall tone for me, because it just makes it wacky and silly. And it's supposed to be like a wacky and silly novel, but like it's taken almost to an extreme point where anything serious in this novel is diminished by it. There are definitely some really insightful and I would say serious moments in this book, and some serious ideas and themes, but it's all sold downriver by the way it's delivered. I really, really did not care for how aimless it was. I just felt like it really took away from what could have been a very, very good novel. I am interested in reading more by this guy, because this is allegedly like his worst novel, or at least that's what his fans say, that this is like the worst one. And I think the guy definitely has potential. I think Thomas Pynchon definitely does have potential to be one of those authors who I just thinks writes bangers. But I am unfortunately going to have to say that Vineland just didn't quite work for me. There are some bits that saved this novel from getting a worse rating than I gave it. The stuff that I really liked was very, very strong, but I also felt like the stuff I didn't like was very, very weak. So I'm gonna give it like a 7.5 out of 10, and I would probably just recommend this to someone who, like, they're okay with an aimless plot, they're okay with themes and ideas being put over character work, and like a cohesive narrative. But if you prefer a cohesive narrative and character work, and for the story to go literally anywhere and not just fall flat on its face by the time you get to the finish, then I'd probably avoid this one. But yeah, I'm gonna give it a 7.5 out of 10. I'll read more eventually, but this was a little bit of a disappointment.